Welcome back to the Adam Schefter podcast as we head out of the NFL trade deadline and into week 10. This is the great escape from the real world. This is where we come for a discussion about trades and firings and football and all sorts of fun stuff. And that's all we're here to do today. That's all. That's it. Nice and simple. And to do that today, we're going to have from the Pat McAfee Show, Ty Schmit to lead the weekly six pack. And we're going to be joined by Mike Tannenbaum, the ESPN analyst who used to be the general manager for the New York Jets before becoming the president of football operations for the Miami Dolphins from 2015 to 18. He founded the 33rd team, which is described as a football think tank with all sorts of great football ideas. So anybody who hasn't checked out the 33rd team, I would urge you to go do that. And we will hear today from the founder of the 33rd team, Mike Tannenbaum, who, by the way, and I'll point this out again in the podcast, we brought him on as a former general manager and executive to assess what was going on at the NFL trade deadline and to assess winners, losers, and big moves. But during the course of that conversation, it occurred to me that Mike Tannenbaum worked with Dan Quinn, the Commanders head coach. He hired Dan Campbell in Miami. He represented Steve Kerr when he got the contract done with the Golden State Warriors. He learned under Bill Parcells. So literally, some of the brightest coaching minds that we've ever seen and are the hottest minds in the game today, Mike Tannenbaum is closely connected to. So his appearance today is a little bit more timely than even I expected it to be. But it's always timely for one of the co-hosts of the Pat McAfee Show, Ty Schmit, who's back this week for another round of the weekly six-pack.
Appreciate it, Schefty. Like you said, hey, lot going on, but there's nothing better to talk about than a fruitful trade deadline. A lot going on in the NFL. You mentioned firings. Let's get right into it, Schefty. Topic number one of this week's six-pack. Busy week in New Orleans that started Monday with Dennis Allen getting fired. I don't want to say that really took anyone by surprise, but he gets fired nonetheless, and we kind of start the musical chairs process here as he's the second head coach getting fired. What do you make of that whole situation?
Well, Ty, you want to hear something amazing? I'm sitting in the ESPN War Room on Sunday afternoon. The Saints lose to the Panthers. My phone rings about 30 minutes later, and I've had this happen a few times now. And somebody calls, they say, hey, just want to give you a heads up. The Saints are firing Dennis Allen. I'm like, what? Yeah, they're firing Dennis Allen. So I get on the phone, I make some calls, and I find out they have not fired Dennis Allen, not yet. Now, it wouldn't make sense, I don't think, usually, for a team at a road game to fire their coach before they fly back to New Orleans. Like, I'm thinking, okay, Dennis Allen's getting fired here when they land, or Sunday night, or Monday morning. So I'm checking in. I'm waiting for Dennis Allen to be fired. Hadn't happened, but the call that came in was credible. Came from inside the locker room. Like, he's getting fired. So we were waiting, and then, of course, the news comes on Monday morning. I got another person texting me, think Dennis Allen's out in New Orleans. Check around. A lot of silence. Boom, finally confirmation. Dennis Allen is out. So now I think we look at it, and the Saints aren't going to begin their head coaching search in full force until after the season. But it's not hard to come up with some of the names that I think are going to be in play. You want some of the names that are going to be in play there, I think? Ready?
Absolutely.
Aaron Glenn, the Lions defensive coordinator, former Saints player, has interviewed well for head coaching jobs, has done a great job with the Lions defense. I expect Aaron Glenn, at the very least, to be interviewed for the Saints head coaching job. You want another candidate right now?
Yeah.
Joe Brady, the Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator, LSU ties, popular in the area, done a great job in Buffalo. How hard is it to come up with Joe Brady as a candidate for the Saints head coaching job? And then if you want to go and look at somebody who's had success in that division, Todd Monken in Baltimore as an offensive coordinator. Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator, is going to get interviews or requests for interviews almost everywhere. And Mike Vrabel's out there. Everybody's going to want to talk to Mike Vrabel, right? But to me, like, I'm going to give you the names right now. Aaron Glenn, Joe Brady, Todd Monken, Mike Vrabel, Ben Johnson. I would lay big money that many of those guys will be on the Saints wish list in the end, and some of them will be interviewed for the Saints head coaching job, and it'll be very interesting to see what they do. But also, it used to be, Ty, that to me, always when we got to Thanksgiving, that was when the hunting season for coaches started, and it started way earlier. And if you remember last year, we were on your show, the Pat McAfee Show, and I said at that time, I think that we were going to get 8 or 9 firings of head coaches, and Pat was like, "What? 8 or 9? Really?" Like, I'm like, "Yeah, Pat, it's coming." And it was that number. It was 9, I believe, or whatever it was. I went through it this week. We are tracking in a similar area again. There are going to be, I'm going to guess right now, I have the list in my computer, but off the top of my head, we're going to get about 8 more this year.
Wow.
8 more coming. But the Saints acted this week. The Jets already have. By the way, we're 2 in. We're 2.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm looking for about 6 more, give or take 1 or 2 either way.
Well, and it's funny, Shefty, just how fast the league moves and how quickly. 2 weeks into the season after the Saints beat the hell out of the Cowboys, I remember talking on Overreaction Monday on our show saying, hey, wow, Saints might be one of the best teams in the NFL. And then obviously they dropped 7 straight. So a couple of those names you mentioned, though, pretty interesting. Obviously, New Orleans has got a lot going on. Don't really have a quarterback in place. Their cap situation is something to monitor, but we'll see. I feel like traditionally that's always been a pretty solid job, good ownership. So a couple of those names sound very interesting. Let's stay in New Orleans for topic number 2 of the 6-pack. After they fired Dennis Allen, I think everyone kind of assumes, okay, these guys are going to be sellers big time at the deadline. And the final domino that we're kind of waiting for, Marshon Lattimore gets traded to the Commanders for a pretty decent haul. What do you make of that whole situation? I think that's arguably, the biggest trade of the trade deadline.
So yeah, again, I'm going to go back to this, but one of the great things about getting to have the honor of being on the Pat McAfee Show with you and the boys is there is a record of what you say, right?
Yep.
And yesterday we were on the show at about 12:10 Eastern, and I said to everybody, the name to watch this afternoon is Marshon Lattimore. There are active talks for him to be dealt. And lo and behold, about 45 minutes later, he was traded to the Washington Commanders. And it said a couple of things to me. It said to me, number one, Washington is all in. Washington is all in. I know the Cowboys and the NFC East have professed to be all in with their acquisition for a 4th-round pick of Jonathan Mingo. But the Washington Commanders really are all in when you're trading all those picks to go get Marshon Lattimore, the 4-time Pro Bowl cornerback from the New Orleans Saints, who will help you win now. And I also look at that trade, aside from Washington being all in, and I say New Orleans is all in on the reality that it knows that it has some cleaning up it has to do. And it knows it has some moves it has to make. And once it gets one of these head coaches in, whether that's Aaron Glenn or Ben Johnson or Mike Vrabel or Joe Brady, then they can begin to make the moves that they need to. But we've seen the Saints be masters at manipulating the salary cap. And at some point, you got to pay for it. I know they're not in as bad a shape as people think. I don't know how they keep doing it every year. They're magical about it, but there has to be some sort of reckoning. And I think them trading away Marshon Lattimore is a recognition. Hey, we have to take some steps to clean up some of the money here. We have to get some younger players in. Lattimore's only 28, but has struggled with injuries recently, is dealing with a hamstring injury now. We'll see when he can make his debut for the Commanders. And so there's a reality there that change is afoot. We saw a head coach fired Monday. We saw a Pro Bowl cornerback traded Tuesday. And that is the start of what should be a very busy offseason in New Orleans.
Well, and it's just funny, Shefty. I think you were the one that tweeted it, last week or this weekend. Look at where we're at right now, where, you got guys leading up to the trade deadline telling their agents, hey, I want to go to Washington. I want
that happened.
Detroit. Yeah.
That happened. Like, and the big thing there to me, why I found it interesting. Others didn't, but why I found it interesting was I've never heard anybody say, I want to go to Washington. I heard 2 people say it. And then I spoke to people and they heard it. So, like, it's not made up. It's something that exists. And I think people are looking at Washington in a different light. And they're looking at it, frankly, let's be honest. We could talk about new ownership and new front office and new coach, and that's all a part of it. But it's the quarterback. It's
Without
the
a doubt.
quarterback. The quarterback comes in, they're winning. They're winning. Totally different mindset, totally different atmosphere. And all of a sudden, you know what? Players want to go where you're going to win, and they want to be around players like Jaden Daniels. So, yes, have you heard anybody during your professional career, Ty, say that they want to go play for the Washington football team? I have not heard that since before Daniel Snyder owned that football team. So the fact that I heard it multiple times last week was interesting and notable to me.
Yeah, no, I think that is very interesting and notable. I mean, you said not only the football aspect of it. I mean, we whether you like it or not, quality of life. You know, whether or not guys would rather go in a warm climate area with a better tax situation than going to Washington D.C. It speaks volumes to what they've done there. And then that other team that you mentioned, Detroit. Let's go to topic number 3 in the 6-pack. They basically did exactly what everyone knew they were going to do, and they did exactly what they needed to do in trading for a perennial Pro Bowler in Za'Darius Smith. Do you think that's it? Did they add the missing piece they needed? I don't think there's any question they're the best team in the NFL right now.
I would agree with that, by the way, on the best team. When I watch them, I say they are the best team, and I know the Chiefs are the lone unbeaten team, but the Lions look like such a force. And if you are Detroit and you're in the position you are, why would you not trade a 2025 fifth round pick and a 2026 sixth round pick for Za'Darius Smith and a 2026 seventh round pick? Like, what are we talking about here? These picks, they don't mean that much. And the Detroit Lions have never been in a position where they're this close to tasting a Super Bowl. So if you could go get a former 3-time Pro Bowl defensive end who excelled in Green Bay, who excelled in Minnesota, who knows the division, who already had sacks this season, who can help your roster and help replace Aiden Hutchinson and Marcus Davenport, the other defensive end that Detroit also lost this season that people seem to forget. Why would you not do that? Like, this was a trade that everybody could see coming. And actually, the Cleveland Browns were the ones who initiated it. The day after Aiden Hutchinson got hurt, they reached out to the Lions. Talks got started. They were moving along. Then they stalled and moving along and stalled. And even Monday afternoon, I heard from somebody, hey, don't know that it's going to happen. Cleveland was a little frustrated, a little disappointed. And then, of course, as often is the case, deadline spur action. Trade gets done on Tuesday morning, and the Lions do exactly what they should have, exactly what they needed, and get in a Pro Bowl defensive end. And by the way, and we said this on NFL Live, wouldn't it be unbelievable if Za'Darius Smith can help this team get to where a lot of people think it's going, to the Super Bowl, and then in the Super Bowl, Aiden Hutchinson gets back for that game, because Dan Campbell seems to think it's a reality, and the people I've spoken to seem to think it's possible. And that would be an incredible storyline. And as I said yesterday, if it doesn't happen, then so what? Then people were wrong. All it does is provide a little bit of hope to a city that is entitled to have plenty of it this year. So let's continue to hope that Aiden Hutchinson can make it back to the Super Bowl if the Lions do indeed make it that far. But I will say this, if the Lions do their part and make it to New Orleans for the Super Bowl, I do think that Aiden Hutchinson is going to play in that game.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, Schefter, you know, just recognizing the window you're in. And I think you look at the track record of Brad Holmes thus far, like those high-end picks that he has, the first 4 to 5 rounds, like they're hitting on guys. So they can have a little bit more leeway with a 6th or a 7th round pick to get a guy who we know is going to go in and perform. And you look at the stats, I mean, they're beating everyone and they're dominating. So I don't necessarily think it shows up or people don't think about it. But after watching that game on Sunday in Green Bay, like that is the one thing that's missing. If they could really get after the quarterback, you know, they can pressure and stuff like that. But if they can get a guy to actually get home and get sacks, it's tough to think of a team who you have to play your best game. You have to play virtually mistake free in order to beat them.
It feels like Detroit's time.
Yeah. It really does. It really does. So yeah, hats off to Detroit for recognizing that and actually doing something. I know Lions fans are ecstatic that they actually went out and made that move. Let's move to topic number 4 in the 6-pack, Shefty. Kind of funny, yesterday, Aaron Rodgers was on the show live and got to react in real time to Mike Williams getting traded to the Steelers. What does that acquisition say about the Steelers? Everyone knows they've been looking for a receiver pretty much since training camp.
Yeah, it's amazing how many receivers they checked in on, and it's amazing how many times they were close to getting something done, whether it was with Brandon Ayuk, whether it was with Christian Kirk, whether it was checking in on Devontae Adams. Mike Williams was supposed to visit them in the spring, but went to New York first and got a deal done with the Jets, never made it to Pittsburgh, and finally now makes it to Pittsburgh in November. And when I look at the trade, what it says to me is that the Steelers believe they're going to be able to throw the football. And it says they're going to throw these end zone jump balls that Mike Williams specializes in. And it's just one more little sign to me that I'm interpreting as the fact that Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback moving forward, right? Like, why is there so much emphasis on a wide receiver? I know they need one, absolutely, whether it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. But with how Russell Wilson has looked in his 2 starts, to me, this just reinforces the idea that it's his job to lose now going forward.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, I mean, if Mike Williams could just show a little bit of the spark of the player he was 2 years ago, who knows if he was kind of starting to get to that point with the Jets. I think, him and Rodgers didn't really get much time together, so we never really saw what he was actually capable of and whether or not he was healthy. He's still recovering. But I'll tell you what, you go somewhere and he doesn't he just needs to help out a little bit. George Pickens is unbelievable. Pat Freiermuth has been, really coming on. So, and I think you're right. I think this kind of signals, hey, this is Russell Wilson's team. They're going to ride or die with him. And based on the way he's looked, they should. Let's go to topic number 5 in the 6-pack. Shefty, this weekend, another just heartbreaking, dismal performance from the Cowboys. And then on top of it, Dak gets hurt. Is he going to go to the IR? Maybe. But the Cowboys, after giving him, the biggest contract ever, the Cowboys have a lot of issues with Dak. What's going on in that whole situation?
Well, first of all, as we tape this early Wednesday morning, I think they will wind up putting Dak Prescott on IR. And that will sideline him into December. And then what is their record in early December if and when he's ready to come back? And if and when he's ready to come back, is it worth it at that point to even bring him back? These are questions that I think have to come up now. And when we talk about Dak and what is going to transpire, I think it's important to look back at what also transpired with Dak. And I go back to this in the offseason. They signed Dak to the most lucrative deal in NFL history on the day that the NFL season kicked off. They waited until September to get the deal done. I remember being in Indianapolis at the Combine in February, checking to see if the Dak deal was going to get done in the offseason to create more cap space so they could go out and sign free agents like Derrick Henry. And there was no movement. There were no talks for a new deal for Dak. Now, you know that deal is going to get done. You know you want to keep him. Wouldn't you rather get ahead of it and do that deal before money goes out to Trevor Lawrence and Jordan Love and some of the other quarterbacks who were paid this offseason? Now, CD Lamb is another player they waited to sign. I understand why that one was going to be hard, because CD Lamb was always going to wait for the wide receiver market to spike the way it did. He wasn't going to do his deal before some of the other wide receivers like Justin Jefferson did their deal. And he knew that he was going to wait. So I understand. I can't fault the Cowboys there in any way, shape, or form. They were not getting that deal for CD done early. But the Dak deal is one where he wants to work with the team. He wants to give the team benefits. And there really weren't very many talks at all leading up to the start of the season when the deal does get done. So they waited unnecessarily. And now Dak is hurt. And now it's a hamstring injury. And now I think Jerry said it's likely, and I think he will be placed on IR, which means he misses 4 games. And now everything's up in the air, and they're 3-5, and it feels like it gets worse every week. And we talk about the Cowboys all the time. I'm going to say this right now. The conversations now moving forward are going to be about what they do to get the team back in 2025, because they're quickly becoming rather irrelevant for 2024 right now.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because people love to kill Dak, and rightfully so. I mean, he's got the biggest contract. He needs to play a lot better. That's going to happen in Dallas. But you go back to it. I mean, and that is what's interesting about not maybe, I don't want to say taking a team friendly deal. Obviously, these guys are going to get as much money as they need to, but you have all the kind of ancillary income when you are the quarterback of the Cowboys. I wonder if that couldn't offset with maybe taking just a little bit less, because you look at that offense, they have no running game. It's basically, hey, if CD Lamb doesn't have 150 yards and 2-3 touchdowns,
Yeah.
they're not doing anything on offense.
But Ty, let's just say that deal gets done in February. I'm going to guess the number. I'm going to guess the number's 55 in February. Yeah. Okay. So it's $5 million less. Well, you say that's not that much, but here's the difference. You get the cap savings of doing a cap friendly deal in 24. So now you have more money. By the way, you know who Dak Prescott's agent is? The same agent as Derrick Henry. You think the two of them would want to play together? And like, there are advantages to doing that deal in February as opposed to September. And they didn't get it done. And the price went up and they didn't get the flexibility. Just unfortunate all around.
Yeah, for sure. And then you also, we talk about this all the time on Pat's show. It's how long can you be an elite or a great team chasing a Super Bowl when you have, 45 to 55% of your salary cap tied up in two players? And that's before even signing Micah Parsons to a deal. It's just,
And by the way, they've been good for a while. They've been good for a while, and they're paying the price for it now in a certain way.
Yep, for sure. So I definitely don't envy the situation that the Cowboys are in, because like you said, I mean, this has been the easy part of their schedule up to this point. They have a murderer's row the next however many weeks. We could be looking at, the Cowboys potentially drafting in the top 5, which is just crazy to think about going, from what we were talking about going into the season. But
and you know what that would be? Before we go to next topic, that would be an off season of conversations about what Dallas is going to do with its top 5 pick.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go to topic number 6. You mentioned it on the Pat McAfee Show yesterday. We've talked about it a little bit for the last, 2 weeks or so here. The return of Christian McCaffrey, it's coming. Yes, there are no setbacks.
I think it's upon us, Ty. I think it's upon us. Now, we'll see what happens today at practice as we record this Wednesday morning. And I was also thinking, I don't believe that Christian McCaffrey has spoken to the media or reporters about his injuries at all since he hasn't played this season. I think he's been quiet. So I would guess that we're going to hear from Christian McCaffrey this week. That's the first thing. And I want to hear some of these explanations about where he's at. But he's been practicing, and as long as there are no setbacks, and for all we know, there could be one today, hoping not, knock on wood. There could be one tomorrow, Friday. Again, serious deal. But as long as there are no setbacks, I expect that he's going to play on Sunday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that will be a huge boost. And we talked about the 49ers yesterday. Didn't do a lot at the trade deadline, made a deadline-beating deal with the Houston Texans, trading a 2026 7th-round pick for defensive tackle Khalil Davis. Again, not a household name, but the move that the 49ers are making at the trade deadline that people didn't talk is getting back Christian McCaffrey. That's the move, right? They're getting back the offensive player of the year, assuming there are no setbacks, to add to the offense. And it's been a struggle for this team to this point to be where they are, but they've stayed afloat, and they're in a division that nobody's run away and won. So they're going to have some sort of chance here if Christian McCaffrey can come back and be anything like Christian McCaffrey. And that's going to be one of the stories of this weekend, him being back, assuming there are no setbacks. Fired up to see it, especially as somebody who drafted him number 1 in his fantasy draft, and he's been sitting in my IR spot all year long. We want Christian McCaffrey back, and hopefully that happens this week.